Welcome to GB Face. My name is Sahar Ghazi. I'm joining live from San Francisco. I'm the managing editor at Global Voices. This is our Hangout series, GB Face. We're going to be heading over to Paris now. I'm joined by Lova, who is our French language editor, currently based in Paris. Hi, Lova.
Hello, wonderful people. Good to be here.
A couple of miles from him, I presume. Also in the same city is Laura Vidal, who is our Latin America community manager. And heading over to London, we're joined by Joey Ayoub, who's a Global Voices contributor, and he is with our MENA team.
Hi.
Hi.
Hi, everybody.
So Lova, Joey, and Laura, it's been a tough week. Last Thursday, there was an attack in Beirut. A few dozen individuals died in a neighborhood. And then a day later in Paris, there were multiple attacks a block away from where you were, Laura. And you ended up being stuck at a bar from the place where the first attack took place. You couldn't get home. And even today, you couldn't get home because there was a false alarm in your neighborhood, and police had kind of taped the area off. Lova, you also live in Paris. You were away from where all this trouble was, but still, it was a big day for you. You were moving places, and life kind of came to a halt. Joey, you were in Paris, but a week before this incident happened, and you consider Paris home, and you also consider Beirut home, where another tragedy took place. So for you, what was it like once it was happening in Beirut, you were far away in London, you feel this connection with your home, and you're kind of reeling from that, and then Paris happens. You ended up writing a story for Global Voices. Could you tell us about and that story ended up going viral. Could you tell us about what you were feeling?
Yeah, well, I mean, the initial reaction was obviously just shock and, just shock, basically, just that. It lasted for quite some time, and I even wrote, when I wrote the post, I was still under shock. I wasn't really thinking in any clear sense. The Beirut attack, happened very quickly, as they usually do in Beirut, because it's usually car explosions. It's not like in Paris. The difference between Beirut and Paris was that Paris took a long time to finish, and so people were on edge for a long time, whereas in Beirut we were on edge, as we are unfortunately to a certain extent used to. Not that you can really get used to something like this. So yeah, so my initial reaction was just shock, and then seeing the reactions online made me think about many things at the same time, which is how the blog post was written.
Laura, for you, you moved to Paris 7 years ago from Venezuela as a student, and you were actually at a bar with a bunch of Venezuelans when this happened. So could you tell us what was going on at that point?
Well, yeah, it wasn't just a typical Friday night. Friday night is the night where everybody goes out. It's the end of the week. It's the end of work. So everybody goes for beer, for wine, for just to see, friends and so on. And I was in a bar that was not too far from one of the streets that was attacked. And then I remember that some girls just told us that there are attacks happening in the city, so stay safe, we're going home, and so on. And so I started receiving messages from all over. Are you okay? What's going on? And I didn't know what was going on. So, we just started reading about everything on social media, and we decided to stay in the bar. And at the end, there was, the messages from the police was stay where you are, don't move, because at the end, the thing is that you don't really know what's going on. You know that it's really close. You know that it's being on in bars and concert places, and there was a hostage situation in the Bataclan. And so it's just this feeling that you don't know what's happening and you don't know what's going to go next. So, and it's also kind of surreal situation. Because I think that when you go out and you have the kind of lives that Parisians tend to have, at least in these last years, you really feel that these things don't really touch you. And then you have a big reality check. And you cannot be divorced from reality or from what's going on outside where you are. and you don't really escape the decisions of your leaders, in a sense.
Yeah.
Lova, what was your reaction to what was going on in Paris? And you spent a lot of time in Madagascar as well.
Right. Well, the reaction was you just feel everything got tense suddenly. I was like you said, I was moving at the time, and at the time my biggest worry was to get the TV hooked up in time so I could watch the France-Germany football game. And I ended up catching it at the bar, and I heard some explosion on TV. So that's how you know that well, maybe this is different. Well, this talking to you guys is it's a bit therapeutic. I feel it's nice to see friendly faces because you're just taking it all in and you're not too sure what you feel. And talking about this right now helps, I think. Yeah, I'm talking about the impact that it also, I mean, what it means and why this seems to mean more than for other tragedy, even though it shouldn't. I think it's something that it helps to just voice it out.
I agree.
Definitely.
Joey, in your post you wrote, some bodies are global, but most bodies remain local, regional, ethnic. What did you mean by that?
So I wrote this post at about 5 a.m. on my phone after the Paris attacks were kind of settling down, quote unquote, like things you felt that, okay, it's over for now at least. And the reaction was obviously, I saw I couldn't help by comparing the reactions online, of course, between the responses to the Beirut attack and the responses to the Paris attack. And in many ways, it's normal because for most people on the internet, and when we talk about that, I'm obviously focusing on the West here, or the Western sphere. Paris is more familiar, so that's natural. But what I also noticed is that the way Beirut was covered was problematic. Not just the reactions by ordinary people, because that's an individual to individual thing that I cannot judge. But the way Beirut was covered, it was covered in a geopolitical angle. It wasn't covered in a human angle. So the most common way of describing because the area where the bomb happened is an area that is dominated, quote unquote, by the political party Hezbollah in Lebanon. And so the way Beirut was called was Hezbollah's stronghold. So the area was bombed, which is kind of the equivalent of calling Paris a NATO stronghold. That's really how ridiculous it is. And for the average Lebanese and for people who kind of, you don't really need to explain these things, calling something a ex-stronghold just dehumanizes everything and politicizes everything, which by definition means dehumanizes everything. And so it was a reaction to that. So the post was a reaction to that, more than a reaction to the actual responses to Paris, because the responses to Paris were beautiful. They were heartfelt, they were compassionate, they were everything. We would love this kind of reaction basically for all regions of the world. And I know it sounds too idealistic sometimes, but it just feels that we should be there by now. But maybe it takes some more time.
And Laura, also after the Paris attacks, you wrote a piece called "After the Paris Attacks, for it to be unity, it can't be partial." And you said, "I don't think we can afford to keep this view of the world anymore, assuming we ever could, and maintain the denial of reality. We cannot see ourselves and others through the lens which we study history and watch the news, us versus them, here and far away. We can't do this anymore." Could you explain that more?
Well, yeah, I guess that what I meant is something that I've been thinking about quite a lot, especially when I started my research, that is on intercultural sensitivities. It's a big part of it, and it makes me think, even the way that even people that are experts and they have thought about this very deeply, and they're people who are compassionate and really wise, they still divide the world between us and them. And you feel that this is a kind of view of the world that it's almost ever present, not only in the media, also in the way you talk about people, in the way you teach history, in the way you see your own history, in the way you teach what home is, in the way you teach what us is, what do we look like, what do the others look like. And I think it's a vision that is not realistic. It doesn't help, and it's almost unsustainable, even if a lot of people just want to push it. So what is really worrying is that, as we all know, a lot of the Muslim population of France suffer a lot of discrimination. And after the attacks of Charlie Hebdo, some of the first victims were the same people that were discriminated against, that were discriminated even more. And after these attacks, it would probably be the same. It's just I cannot help thinking. This morning I took the bus, and I remember one lady that was full veiled, and I felt that she was more nervous than everybody else on the bus. She was extremely tense because I really felt that she was thinking, okay, now people are going to look at me, with disapproval. She felt like people don't like me, and this, it feels terrible. It feels terrible because you don't move a finger to do anything, and then you're blamed for everything. And it's, again, this idea of this is what the evil looks like. And it's very difficult not to buy it because it's everywhere.
Lova wrote this beautiful piece. It was a series of letters between him and another Global Voices contributor, Nwach, from Nigeria after Charlie Hebdo, and I think this is a good place to kind of plug it in. Lova asked this question in this beautiful piece called Creating a Media of Empathy, One Letter at a Time. The time to have a global discussion on terror attacks, free speech, empathy, and Islamophobia is not when tragedy strikes, but beforehand, and when cooler heads prevail. Yet, whether we like it or not, the public thirst to make sense of the world is highest when such sad events occur. The timing might be ideal, but we have the opportunity as media contributors to reframe the conversation for thousands of readers all over the world while they're paying attention. So, Lova, as an editor at Global Voices, one of our missions is to build global understanding and build bridges between groups that kind of aren't talking, don't understand their worldview. So it's really hard, right, being in this kind of a situation. So this is the mission that is guiding us every day, and our audience is small. But then when something like this happens, we have a huge amount of attention. An essay that Joey wrote for his blog, we republish it. It gets more than 100,000 views within 24 hours. It gets shared tens of thousands of times. This is our message that we want to be telling to everyone. We want tens of thousands of people to share this message, but it's getting shared now. So what is that like for someone like you? How do you balance that, and what kind of ideas are coming to your mind, even about stories in Francophone Africa that you're trying to get attention to every day?
I know it's probably not the right word to say, but I'm so glad that people are reading Joy's piece, because hopefully then it by default it would get hopefully a little bit of attention as well to the piece that is somewhat linked on Global Voices. And that's really all we're trying to do. I think we've made peace with the fact that our writing will never get the type of writing that you get when it's involving celebrity or the mainstream media, and that's totally fine. But we're hoping that for the people that might get interested in trying to know a little bit better what's going on in the rest of the world, then now that's the opportunity. It's there. They've come. And hopefully we can get them interested. We welcome them to read a little bit more about other tragedies in other places, in Burundi, in Beirut, clearly, and maybe not tragedy that were as striking as terrorist attack, but also famine, malnutrition, all those things that are happening. It's now that well, I know it was a tragic event, but if you can start the conversation now, then let's have it. And if you can convert just a few people, then I think we've done quite a bit already.
You know, if I may, I spent the past few days just reading responses to the blog post. And it could be just people commenting on Facebook or like on Twitter, you know, or people reblogging it on their website or anything like that. And I found it very, very fascinating. Not surprising, but fascinating. That there were, like, it was kind of divided into two camps. If you want three camps, but I'm going to focus on the two good camps. So the two good camps were people who instinctively got it. So they instinctively understood what I wrote. And you have those who didn't get it, but were kind of trying to. And obviously, this goes back to the global versus ethnic, you know, these kinds of narratives. How if you're part of this global body, if you want to use that word, so that we don't use West versus East because that doesn't mean anything. If you're part of this global body, then it doesn't mean that you're incapable of understanding something that is regional, quote unquote. But it will take you an extra effort. Whereas if you're part of the regional by default, which is, for example, myself, then you can understand both the global and the regional. Because the global, you have to understand whether you want to or not. That's how power structures work, because it comes to you whether you want it or not. The regional is something that you understand instinctively, but you always obviously wonder, why is the regional not already global? And this is the challenge. I mean, this is the hard part, because it leads to uncomfortable questions, obviously, and very uncomfortable answers probably as well. And so my point was that I found it very, very interesting that the vast majority of those who shared it at the beginning, before it became viral, quote unquote, were people of color, basically, using the American terminology, of course, because it doesn't technically mean color.
Yeah.
Yeah, as Laura knows. But it were people basically who were not part of, they were not white, to use that word.
They've been marginalized.
Yeah, for like one way or another, without getting into too much detail. So it was like black communities in the UK, it was Muslim communities in the UK, it was black people who are part of the Black Lives Matter in the States, even like people who are part of the indigenous movements in Latin America. It really went, you can see that there's a global narrative just waiting to be called global, because it's already there. It's not that we really need to do anything. It's just that the attention that it gets is not proportional to the attention it deserves, I guess, if that doesn't
Global lives matter.
Yeah.
Yeah, I will agree a lot with that. I think, in fact, it was very interesting, that point that Joy just underlined, you know, the idea that you have the regional and the global. I think most of regionals are also global, but we're just seeing just one regional. You know, it's one region that becomes global. And then we get ideas like non-white, ethnic, and normal. So the center is always the same people. The center of power it always looks the same. And at the end is it's, you know, even these divisions, you know, we talk about the so-called third world, the global south, it's these things are always very difficult to talk about. But at the end, there's one definition that I kind of like, that they talk about the majority world, because at the end, the center of this world that we see as global, as the center, it's very tiny. And to think about these things is complicated. Everything changes depending on the angle. And that's why I kind of underline the importance of education in these matters, because what we're seeing now is a result of a failed education, of the failure of teaching people from very early age. You belong to one group and one group only. You're not part of the rest. And also that when you start recognizing that there are differences and these differences exchange, the idea of, for example, to talk about intercultural education and concentrate on integration, it feels that the discussion is quite incomplete. So these are the ones that have to learn how to become us. What about us understanding them, becoming, like, knowing that we are also them? So this sort of equality in terms of who are who.
Mm.
It's a conversation that we're starting really late, and we see the results right now of this lack of preparation.
Right, and I just wanted to say that with respect to that, it's we're talking about grieving right now, whether it is in Beirut or in France, and this conversation that we're having is very important. But the reason why I thought it might be better to talk about race and Islamophobia and all that when cooler head prevails is because right now a lot of people are grieving in Paris, and I think we need to let that process go because you cannot really choose when you grieve or why you grieve, right? It's like it's an emotion. It's raw. It's like falling in love. It just happens. And if we train too early to police and tell them, hey, you should. There's also other tragedy in the world that we need to be paying attention to. We might be doing something not too far from the polarizing effect of things. They're grieving right now. It's just grief is universal, and that needs to happen. I'm not saying that's what we're doing right now, but Joey earlier mentioned the movement Black Lives Matter, and one of the leaders mentioned something important whenever someone else say, well, all lives matter. Here we might be having the same discussion here, and we're not trying to divide. It's a very thin line, a very careful line that we need to follow here. That we need to feel empathy. I know it's difficult for everyone all the time. And we need certainly to educate people about other tragedies in the rest of the world. But well,
It's
I guess
hard.
yes, it's hard. It's very hard.
Hard, and I guess there's really no line to really follow there. I want to switch back a bit there. So you mentioned how we need to have empathy and let people grieve, but grieving is different for all. Like after Charlie Hebdo, I'm in San Francisco. I go to run down the street all the time in this park 3 times a week, and I see this gentleman there all the time. And one day when I'm running, he stops me to ask me, a conversation ensued that was Islamophobic. Now I don't wear my ethnicity or my religion on my shoulder. I go running there. He's my neighbor, and it was very embarrassing for me. I'm just running, and someone suddenly stops me and wants to have a conversation with me about Charlie Hebdo and asking me how I feel about it. I'm like, I'm running, and I see him every day. I go. Every week I go running 3 times a week. I still see this man. It's so embarrassing for me. Every time I see him, I'm like, he looks at me. What is he thinking? And I'm just like, just focus on the run. It's so I understand what you're saying about grieving, but at the same time, I'm sitting here. This man is completely unaffected by what happened there, but he feels like he has a right to stop me. So, some certain stories take a life of their own on individuals completely disconnected from it. So,
if I may,
go for it, Joe.
Like for example, if we want to take the example of Black Lives Matter, because it's an example that I really love because they're very, very inspiring what they're trying to do. When people respond, all lives matter, it just misses the point. That's the thing. Because when people say Black Lives Matter, they're not saying Asian lives don't matter. That's not the point. And then still not saying white lives don't matter. That's definitely not the point. The point is that because you use, like let's say people use all lives matter all the time, if you're saying all lives matter, then that means that you live in a reality where Black lives matter already. And because Black lives don't matter in the same way that white lives matter in the States, if we take the American example, then that's why you should highlight it. That's the difference. So unfortunately, when it comes to grieving, the example that Sahar says is it's a very good example because Paris, like the grieving for Paris was universal. It happened in Beirut as well. It was quite universal, and I think this poses interesting questions. And it's not about good versus bad. It's not like Beirut should have had a proportional. It's not that kind of thing. But that I feel that if I were to grieve for Beirut in a non-Beiruti context, so if I were to grieve for Beirut in Paris, it wouldn't feel as natural as if I would grieve for Beirut and New York, just because there's a link between these two areas, if you want, of the world. And the fact that there is a link between them, there isn't a link between the rest of the world, like between Beirut and Paris, for example, in the same way. For me, that is the problematic, because when people talk about us versus them, I don't know which one, where I am. I don't know if I'm us or if I'm them, because when people attack, like when they murdered Parisians, that's me. And when they attack refugees, that's me as well. That's just how it is. It's a pure matter of luck that I was born in the post-Civil War generation. Because if I was born in the Civil War generation in Lebanon, I might have been one of those boat people, as they call them now. It's just a matter of luck. And I don't think matter of luck should be what defines humanity. I don't think that's how it should work. That's the thing.
Yeah, I also wanted to say something about this idea of grieving, but it's impossible for me not to be touched. I mean, if there's something that can unite you with somebody or with people or with the place you are, is grieving and tragedy. I think every time I talk about France and about Paris, it's always, I need to explain so many things because it means so much to me to be in France, to be studying in France, to have friends from all over the world in a truly international city. And I cannot be indifferent to what is happening in my country. You know, the situation is extremely different, but we have over 100 violent deaths in Venezuela per week. You know, this is also a war. This is something that grieves me deeply. I think that what happens is that when we talk about the global conversation, when we talk about the images that we see, who are the people that we see the most? Who are the people that we consider as the people that it would hurt if we lose them? It would hurt if they suffer. It hurts when these people suffer. And yes, emotions are extremely natural. They even can command you. You don't always command them, unfortunately. But these emotions are also influenced, I believe, by the images we see. And sometimes when you see some numbers really growing up and they identify with what you think is human, important, close to you, it hurts a lot more. So this is why it's problematic, and I sort of agree with Joy, because at the end you belong to the people that appear on the images just because of luck. You didn't choose to be part of the images, you didn't choose to be part of the group that is not famous or cared for or important. This is something that people don't choose.
Right.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm going to pop in. There's a question that has come in. I also wanted to add to that. I think that what Joey said and what you mentioned, Laura, this is a theme across our community, that many people come from multiple different localities. They call different places home. They speak multiple different languages. After Alan Kurdi's body washed ashore in Turkey, our Iran editor, Masa, wrote a piece saying that the weight of my Canadian passport is heavy, something to that degree. She is Iranian, and her parents immigrated to Canada. So she is, a different path took her, she went on a different path for that one decision, and she understands that she's lucky. And this is a theme across our community where people realize that the notion of their identity is complex, and a lot of the reason why it is complex is for decisions that they didn't make, their family made, or maybe some of the decisions are that they made, but a lot of it, there's a heavy history behind it. We have a few questions that have come in. We have one from Lauren Finch. I'm going to ask this one first. Lauren is our news editor based in Spain. Okay. A question for Joey. Were there any Western media outlets that you feel did cover Beirut in a humanizing way, so that we can point to them and applaud and make noise in the hopes of promoting a change?
Sure. I mean, if we talk about mainstream versus social media, that's obviously very different. There were many alternative news websites that did a very good job. And Al Jazeera, if I'm not mistaken, Al Jazeera just covered it as you should cover it. It was a tragedy, an attack, civilians were killed, these kinds of things, as you would expect. I was very disappointed. I mean, not disappointed. I don't get disappointed anymore by these things. But It was very, very saddening and I got very angry as well when I heard the terms, as I said before, Hezbollah stronghold. Those were the things that really bothered me, because I have two friends who were very close to the blast. They are not part of Hezbollah, and even if they were, that's not the point. They are still civilians, because Hezbollah is a political party in Lebanon. Whether we like them or not, that's a whole other story. They are civilians. Honestly, not that many. Unfortunately, not that many covered it in a good way. Even considering the context, the fact that Beirut is not as known, as I said, on the internet, let's say, as Paris is. So even considering that, it was still not good. And it became good after the reactions that some of us had after the Paris attack, including my blog post, including many others as well. Then it became very interesting. This is when, on the contrary, I was very moved by people praising Adel Termos, the guy who sacrificed his life in Beirut when he jumped over one of the suicide bombers. This man, to just give an example, he is a member of Hezbollah politically. His wife now, when they took pictures with his widow, I mean, unfortunately to use that term, with his photo, they were under Hezbollah flags. I mean, this is how it is. For them, that's how it is. And whether we like it or not, that's how it is. And this man sacrificed his life to save countless people. We have no idea. And this includes people who were not Shia, including Palestinians and Syrian refugees. So this is how it is. And I was happy by the aftermath, sadly, given the context, by some of the responses. Some of the articles were very, very nice. But at the time, no, not at all.
We have another question coming in from Kuhari, who's based in Egypt and manages our translation team. Do you think the difference of attention between incidents in the developed world and the third world can be a difference between media importance, presence, freedoms between both worlds? Or even maybe the difference of level of welfare between them?
Can I take that one?
Go for it.
Yeah, in certain contexts, yes. In certain other contexts, no. And definitely, if we're talking about a nation like Iran, where you would have severe restrictions on journalism, or in Turkey or in any other places, then yeah, definitely, that's a definite factor to take in. But in Beirut, you don't really have that. Anyone can really cover Beirut quite openly, relatively openly at least, as openly as most Lebanese news stations can. We have a decent, not that good by other standards, but relatively free press. I can more or less say whatever I want. I haven't gotten into any trouble any time, and I criticize absolutely everyone in a very, very serious way. So I think it does have to do with power relations. I think because unfortunately at the end of the day, you need to ask these questions. You need to talk about the global versus the regional. These are just things that, as uncomfortable as they may seem, not asking them, I feel, is much more dangerous than asking them. And yes, I hope that answers the questions. Yeah.
And Joey, we didn't get a chance to kind of touch upon structural racism and the role that plays. Would you like to talk a bit about that? And Laura and Lova, you as well?
Sure. If you guys want to go ahead first, I can continue. Laura.
Oh well, I think this even the word structural says it all. It's something that actually, I will say that we all buy into it, whether we want it or not, whether we're educated or not. It's something that surrounds us, and in some ways it poisons the water. Sometimes it's even a reflex. You know that you read certain stories and certain stories you don't care too much, or sometimes you expect that some people will go through something, and sometimes I've been very surprised. I remember there was a kind of educational program in Spain that I used to like very much. That its name in Spanish was Redes, and I remember one episode that was about violence and what violence was, and with the idea of Steven Pinker's idea that the planet it's actually getting less and less violent. And there was one part of the show saying that the regions that are actually at war right now is because they have been through a process of de-civilization. So when we talk about structural racism, I think this is a good example. This is a program that aims to educate people, to illustrate scientific ideas and just vulgarize the ideas of very good thinkers. But there's this a kind of reflex, you know. I wonder how much did they think about when they wrote the script for that, because the images, of course, were women in the Middle East full veiled crying because there was a bomb or there was an attack, and these images were on, and the words that were with it was, these regions have suffered a process of decivilization. So civilized countries that look like us don't go through these problems.
Right.
And this is something that it's really easy to see, and it's a narrative that it's repeated. Even if you want to go against it, even if you know intellectually that this is not right, this discourse is a little bit strange, it just pops out because it's part of education, it's part of the regular narrative that, by the way, is not only consumed by the West, it's consumed by the rest of the world as well. The people that we consider to be the so-called third world, and I am allergic to that division, those are the images we have of ourselves and others. I would say that the media in Venezuela, I wouldn't dare to describe it right now because I'm not living there. But you know, you see that the opera theater of my city of Maracay had a French flag. You know, it has all the lights with the French flag, which I think is wonderful. It's beautiful. They're connecting. But we also have a big Lebanese community in that city. And I don't remember seeing anything about, maybe there was and I didn't see it. But, you know, this is something that I'm not the one saying this. There's been studies and so on. You know, this vision of the world that is quite, let's say, quote unquote, Western, it's also exported in such a way that even those that belong to the third world see ourselves like that and see our neighbors like that and know more about the West and the capitals and the states of the United States than even the capitals in our own regions.
Our conscious and subconscious is meant to be Eurocentric.
The president of Benin, a small country on the west coast of Africa, just declared that there would be 2 days national mourning in Benin, and it's wonderful and all, but there was major flooding in his country like several months earlier, and it was business as usual. And those presidents came when Charlie happened. They came to France to march, while there was like killings happening in their own countries. So clearly, that the structural power, structural racism is there, and it's just the gap is so scary in a lot of ways that you're kind of afraid to see what kind of solution we can bring to that. But I would just like to say that maybe with the fact that we have in this conversation, the four of us, isn't that a tiny bit of hope, because we at least can talk about it and we have identified the problem? Because I would imagine having this conversation just maybe 40 years ago, it was just a fact. It was a fact that it will be that the life lost in Beirut just don't weigh the same as the life lost in Paris. It was just like that. And now at least we can question that. And I know other people have tried to work on that, on the whole concept of media of empathy over and over again. And we're making just little incremental progress. At least I'd love to think that that's the case. It's so tiny that we don't see it, but hopefully
happening.
We'll get there.
Yeah, I definitely think that we are. On the contrary, that was the I think that's why the post that we wrote got this kind of attention. On the contrary.
Yeah, and they got nice exchanges.
Exactly, and I think, Sarah, to go back to your point, the thing about structural anything, even if we're talking about structural racism, is that it's not about choice, and this is what people who don't get the point of structural racism still don't understand. And again, it's not about white versus non-white, because we have structural racism in Lebanon, and all of us. If you look at Lebanon from a Western perspective, you all put us in one category, but we certainly don't.
Even from a Pakistani category.
Exactly. So it's really like structural. The point about something as complex, and yet as real as structural racism is that when something like Charlie Hebdo happened, and if I was, let's say, in Paris, if my personal safety as someone who is of Arab origins, as someone who's an Arab and everything, if my personal safety would be compromised because of it, even though obviously have absolutely nothing to do with it. This is structural racism, because the association is there. Whereas when you have Anders Breivik, the guy who massacred something like 100 people in Norway, no one changes their attitude towards Norwegians. And no one changes their attitude towards Americans based on what their governments are doing. And if they did, Americans will be maybe the most discriminated people on the planet, because it's very serious. And so I guess this is the point about structural racism. And this is what, again, it has nothing to do with colors. People wouldn't know, if people have never been to Turkey, they wouldn't know the difference between a Turk and a Kurd. But the Turks do, and the Kurds do. And the Kurds have to, whether they want to or not, they have to know that there is a difference because they live in it. And that's the difference.
And people don't even realize themselves that they're a victim of structural racism.
Exactly. That's when it gets very complicated even more.
So I'd like to kind of loop the circle and come back to why a community like us is having this conversation. We are a borderless community. Laura, you mentioned that education is one of the reasons why you think this is happening. For me, I think it's because our borders are closed, not just between countries, but also within countries. I often think of Pakistan, where I look at my Facebook feed. A lot of my friends are in Pakistan, and I see my news feed, and a lot of people were talking about what happened in Paris. A lot of people were talking about what happened in Beirut, but I don't see my feed filled up with that when something horrible happens in Balochistan, which is a province within Pakistan where horrible things happen all the time. Or similarly in Afghanistan, which is right across the border, there have been these huge protests linked to racism within their society, which is a similar theme of racism that's happening in Pakistan, but I don't see anyone posting anything about that. So, but they don't know. They don't know that they are victims of this structural racism that's kind of, it's the world that has been framed to them. They don't even know that the reason why they're feeling closer to Paris is because they've never gone to Balochistan, not because they can't, because they don't have it's not a visa requirement, but in their mind, these people have been made the other.
Exactly.
And people in Paris are not the other. So for us...
And this happens everywhere. Lebanon is one of the smallest countries on the planet, and yet it's very uncommon for someone from Beirut to go to Tripoli. And then we talked about this, me and a friend from Tripoli, actually, when the bombing in Dahiya happened. And he said that this wouldn't have made national headlines in Beirut, in Lebanon, I mean. See, I just did that again. In Lebanon, if the same would have happened in Trablus. And the things have been happening in Tripoli, Trablus is Tripoli. Because Tripoli also suffers quite a lot of attacks, quite a lot of suffering, quite a lot of destruction. And Tripoli is maybe not 20, but like 15 minutes away by car. Lebanon is very, very small. And yet because what happened in Beirut is closer to the center, quote unquote, to what happened in Lebanon, it's also politicized in Lebanon. And Lebanon is one of, as I said, we're only 4 million people. People don't even see us on the map because the country is so small. And yet this happened because it's part of power structures. It's part of how people react to one another. On the contrary, I think it's very, very interesting because I don't think this kind of discussion would have happened just a few years ago, as Lova said. So I do think that things are changing. It's inevitable that they will, because unless people want to live in their own cupola or in their own fortress, as people call Fortress Europe sometimes, then this is bound to continue. And they cannot live in Fortress Europe because it doesn't exist. It has never existed, and it will never exist. That's the point. That's why you call it a fortress. You have the illusion that you are separated from the world.
Yeah. And I wanted to add something about that because it's true that I always talk about education, maybe because I work on that. It's very common that you see things from your angle and you're obsessed with your angle. But these are things that are connected in a sort of network, and this network is made of, power structures. The power structures that control these networks are the ones that actually they set the motion of the rest of the little points. It's these power structures, the ones that decide where the borders are, who are inside and outside their borders, what kind of resources do we have inside of what kind of borders, what belongs to what, and what do we need to learn, and who are the people we are, how do you understand your own identity, and how do you understand the identity of others. And these are the same power structures that decide what are the images that will prevail, who are the people that we're going to see as humans, as people who deserve our compassion, and people who deserve our empathy, our ideas of beauty, our ideas of, all these things are really intertwined, and they're really complex, extremely complicated, and they have to do with things that have been there for a long time, and they have been seen as, the mandatory, normal desirable thing. And it's a system of values that unfortunately doesn't work.
Yeah.
Wasn't the revolution of internet supposed to solve that in some ways? Like we've made posters like Joey's post available for people to read, right? So I know I'm being the devil's advocate a little bit here, but maybe we are just, even in our community, are we a little bit too lazy then with what we decide to focus on? Because if we want, we could learn a lot more about other countries. And I honestly, I'm being lazy myself. I wanted to know all about what was going on in Beirut because, well, I know Joey, I know Talia, and the other thing, what's happening when the typhoon hit Philippines. Well, we just went there, and so yeah, I wanted to know, and it's probably not giving enough effort on a lot of level. And is there a way then that we can help?
I have something to say about that, because internet is a thing. Internet just reflects what we are. The use of internet, the fact that internet can be so isolating sometimes is because it's the people who come from these power structures, who come from this system of values, are the ones using these tools. Mm-hmm. So if you are
dominate the use of these tools. So as the internet has gone away from the open internet to Facebook.
Exactly. Yeah, that's another thing. Who are the people using this tool? Well, the people that come from this system. It will be very strange that they will do things differently. It will be very strange that things look differently. Yeah. That doesn't mean that there is no hope. I mean, the fact that we're talking about this, a lot of the exchanges I've seen, a lot of beautiful letters and texts of support, and even researchers saying, this shows, people working on intercultural relations saying, this shows that this conversation is urgent, not important, just urgent. We need to rephrase things. We need to restructure things, because it's everywhere. It's we cannot talk about one thing happening in education, one thing happening in politics, one thing happening in media. Everything is connected.
Mm-hmm.
Is the save button now on for Beirut? I mean, I know we had the save button for Paris. I don't know. They were complaining about the fact that it was not available for the other part of the world. Can you say now that you're safe if you're?
I don't know, because the thing is that I didn't really care about that. It was just a small detail in my post. But I mean, I guess I understand why people would highlight that. I mean, I think Mark Zuckerberg said something along the lines of, "It will be made available in the future" or something like that. But I mean, for me, it's just a very, very small detail. I even regret sometimes, to be honest, mentioning that part on the post, because so many media has just focused on it, because I guess it's it's a sexier topic to discuss than talking about structural racism. Yeah, again, I mean that it makes sense also. But to go back to your point, Love, I think the internet, as Laura said, it can be a solution, sure, but it can be the exact opposite as well. Because what tends to happen in many cases is that you surround yourself with like-minded people. So if you're someone who's very far right, who hates everyone, whatever, you will figure out a way to just be surrounded on your Facebook by people who are like that. It's not necessarily the case. You might be able to have a more diversified Facebook page or contacts than others, sure. But the point is that these things just interplay with one another. There isn't really a one formula way of analyzing the way the internet has nothing, except if you do it per generation. So you look at the comparison between this generation and the one before it, and you do see comparison, you do see these changes, because as you say, it's kind of incremental. It's not really, you don't really see it on a day-to-day basis, which I think is itself.
Sorry, I was going to say that until the system of values changes, the use of internet will not change.
Yeah, that's the thing, it's structural. It's not individual, yeah, it's not a personal value thing.
So we've gone way over time, but we have another question that came in that's very important, and so I'm just going to push this conversation for a little bit more. But I have one thing that I wanted to, just you guys were talking about it, and this comes to my mind. So Joey is, 24 years old, and when I read his essay, my immediate reaction was, I consider myself someone who's traveled the world, who's global, but I was not. When I was 24, the internet wasn't what it is today. So Joey kind of grew up with this really open environment, so his mind can kind of like I read his essay and it was beautiful, and I don't think I could have. I agreed with everything that was written there, but I don't think that at 24 I could have thought about those things. So it made me think about so many people that are like him, who live between many different worlds, like many Global Voices contributors, their background. Like, Joey, how many countries have you traveled? And for you, why do you think that the world is global? Like, for me to come to that realization, it took a while. You know,
Yeah.
what is something about the internet, something about your exposure at a young age kind of like pushed you?
Definitely. And I mean, the internet is what people, I mean, in a very basic sense, the fact that I can go on Reddit, for example, social network, and I can talk to someone who I don't even know where he or she is. And that's the point. We would talk about stuff, you know, architecture, world news, whatever, what have you. And I would just not know where that person is from. And but at the same time, I can find people with whom I would agree with so much that I just feel that how are we not from the same people, quote unquote? Because when people have a natural tendency, obviously, to put things in boxes, and I think it's kind of what ruins that narrative, what ruins that vision is us, basically, those who don't really feel that we belong, and we don't really feel the need to belong to one box. That's the thing. That's the difference. It's not that we feel that there's something missing in our lives. No, I mean, I'm quite comfortable, for me personally, with this kind of chaotic mixture of identities that I have. And what I find very easy to do, on the contrary, is almost wherever I go, it's very easy for me to talk to people. So I travel to many countries, as you said. I've been to Peru, to Madagascar, to Sri Lanka, to Philippines, just like 4 completely unrelated nations, so-called unrelated. I've never felt a foreigner in these nations. And I don't think that's something that, I think that in itself is a privilege that's not really treasured, because people can go to Madagascar, let's say, and become friends with lots of Malagasys, and you feel very comfortable there, definitely. But you would always feel that, okay, this is still not your place. For me, these questions don't come up until I am forced to be in that category. So I always joke about the fact that I never knew I was an Arab before I went to Paris, just because in Lebanon these questions just don't matter. For me, in this context, they matter for other contexts. And because I was basically told that this is what you are, and I didn't know that I was. It's not that I mind being an Arab. Sure, it sounds nice, but that's not the point, or at least that shouldn't be the only point. It should be sure that I am of Arab heritage, definitely, but I'm also much more. And I think this de-individualization, this dehumanization of people, putting them in political boxes, because people don't choose what they are. These are political terms, to a large extent, at least. I think this is the challenge, and I think this is the miracle of the internet, because I am the product of the internet much more than I am the product of my national boundaries, because I never chose what the limits of Lebanon are. Some French guy chose it like 100 years ago.
Like many other places.
So I'm 34, right? So for me, hearing this is like, you know, it makes sense. Like, I'm not I was not going through those formative years on the internet, but Joey was. And I feel like that open internet, like that's one of the reasons why we at Global Voices defend the open internet, and we're worried about corporations, you know, trying to create these facades of free internet that's siphon, you know, internet.org, which has been rebranded as something else. And we want to protect the open internet. We want to protect this open conversation, and for that very reason, that people like Joey, you know, it makes our world seem more global. It creates more narratives along those lines. So we have a question coming in from Elizabeth Rivera, who's a Global Voices contributor, who you can say she's from many different places. You can say Mexico, Chile. She's asking, so I've seen this question going around, and I would love to know your opinion. Is media not covering these events, or are people not listening? This goes back to what you were kind of going towards, Lova, earlier. You asked this question as well. Who would like to take this one on?
I read something about this morning on Facebook. Yeah, it's not that media is not covering, it's that people are not listening.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, I think our attention has been quite educated by the media. Sure, probably a lot of, because now you go everywhere there's media, independent citizen media, mainstream media with citizen media. If you want to find information, you're very likely to find it if you're looking for it. But why are we not looking for it? I think we need to go back to the system of values that creates the media and creates us as consumers of media.
And, you know, identifying with what is home, you know, the structural racism that exists that decides what our home is, and before we even know it, I mentioned this earlier before this hangout launched, that I was asked about. I moved to Pakistan when I was 9 years old, and I was asked about race before what my race was, when I didn't even understand what that term meant. So those kinds of questions, when they kind of erase, those aren't happening, when we're all at Global Voices, we talk a lot about inclusivity. We don't talk necessarily, we're a diverse community, but we want everyone to feel like they're at home with multiple identities. Like, you shouldn't have to feel like if people are boxing you, and like I never feel like when I'm with Global Voices people. You're right, Joey. I feel like there's a bond that's connecting us that has nothing to do with geography, has nothing to do with our luck, the things that we inherited just from, you know, being born. There's something else that's happening. It's our consciousness. It's our experiences. It's our awakening. And so people listening, I feel like more people are going to listen when they realize that we're not defined by the things that we have no control over, but we're defined by.
And I do think, to go back to Ellie's point, I do think there's also a generational aspect to this, obviously. Just to generalize, I mean, it differs a lot from context to context. But as a general rule, I do feel that many, in terms of internet generation, our generation has a much easier capacity to understand things that before would just seem too alien to understand. So when, like, just the fact that I can connect to anyone, just that possibility, it's a huge thing. It's a very, very huge thing. But sorry, to go back to Ellie's point as to who is to blame? No one really. That's the thing. That's the point of structure. It's not really. It's really out of your choice. It's not. It doesn't mean that you cannot affect it. You definitely can, and you can change it completely, and, you know, throw it out and have a new structure and everything. Definitely. But unfortunately, because these are vague concepts, it's not easy to grasp it. But at the same time, once you understand that it is a reality, whether you want it or not, because the thing is, again, to go back to the Black Lives Matter. It's not that now Black lives they should matter now. It's just that it took so long for the Black Lives Matter movement to become part of the mainstream, because it's part of the American narrative, and unfortunately, part of the American narrative excludes the Black narrative. And I think this is changing slowly, but it is. You can see it happening. The fact that they can actually talk about Black Lives Matter as political candidates. This is something that you wouldn't really hear just a few years ago. So these things are happening, and I think maybe to kind of go back to close the loop in a way, I asked a few years ago, I sent an email to Noam Chomsky. I asked him, there was something going on, I don't remember. I asked him something like, why do you still bother? Like, how can you still have hope? Why are you still bothering with these things? You've been doing it for like 80 years now. How did you not stop? And he told me, and I was like 17 or 18, so the question was probably stupid. But he responded in a very nice way, and I keep on remembering that. He said something along the lines of, you should always remember that we are the products of people before us. Because again, when we talk about, you know, feminism, let's say now, we forget that it was a struggle. It didn't come like that. Now we can talk about it, and it becomes part of the mainstream, and, you know, all of these debates here and there. But there had to be a point where people had to sacrifice quite a lot, their lives often, for it to get there. I think this is the point where I would say, okay, I have it bad, but it was much, much worse. It could be much, much worse. And I think the fact that I understand that even that is random, it's not that I choose it. The fact that, sorry, just to give a very small detail, but it makes sense, the fact that my grandfather is from Haifa, which is now part of Israel, but originally before it was part of Palestine, the fact that he came to Lebanon and was given the nationality because he was a Christian, he is a Christian, and that it wasn't given to other people because they were Muslim, because it was part of Lebanon's colonial past with dear old France. That in itself could, just that small detail of an accident of birth could have just meant that I might have never existed, because he might have not met my grandmother, and he might have all of these things. It's pure luck. And if we want to accept things the way they are, want to accept structures the way they are, we are asking for trouble. We are asking for lots of things that we just don't want to accept until they become violent, until they become dangerous. That's the thing, I guess.
That's a beautiful note that we're going to end this on. And I was just thinking when you were talking, you're right. We don't even have a term for what we're talking about right now. Like feminism, it took a while for it to even get that term. What are we going to call this, what we're talking about?
Exactly.
So thank you for joining, Lova.
Thank you, everyone.
Laura.
Thank you.
And Joey.
See ya.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.